All right, hi everyone. This is our first episode of our web series for Daily Product Prep. Here we do product manager hiring manager interviews. We also do mock interviews, and we ultimately try to get PMs their dream jobs. So first, for today, we actually have our lovely Charlotte Harris, who is the talent lead over at OpenCare, which is a post-Series A health tech startup. Really glad to have you here, Charlotte.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Good to see you again, Quentin.
Good to see you again. And I'm really, really excited to share with our viewers your story and also like what you do. I think you're one of the few talent people in the talent community that take a very data approach to talent. So I'd love to hear your insights and share what you know about hiring product managers and kind of see it from the other side of the bridge. And before we get into that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do over at OpenCare?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the talent acquisition lead at OpenCare. So I actually joined the company like 2 years ago, and I was hired as the company's first sourcer. So I came from an executive search firm, and this was my first step into tech. And so I came in and I set out all of our processes and strategies for talent sourcing, so things like market mapping and messaging and all of those data items, and then moved into a full cycle position where I was responsible for interviewing and actually closing candidates. And recently just stepped into team lead roles. So I get to do all that, and then also be responsible for other people. I don't know who let me do that, but here we are. So that's what I do.
That's awesome. And I know that you're known for like the funnel approach you take to hiring, which is you actually look at every step as if it was a conversion funnel and see how many
Yeah.
people you're sourcing, how many people you reached out to, the replies, and so forth. And I think a great place for us to just jump right into it is what are some of the main mistakes or the top mistakes that you see product managers have on terms of when they're applying for a position like a company such as OpenCare?
Yeah. I think the main thing that I see not only in the way people describe their experience like on LinkedIn or in their resume, but also when they're in interviews is going to tactical, and not necessarily quantifying outcomes, but
Mm.
where you can, but also just calling out the business impacts that you've driven in your role. This is a common mistake that we see not just for PMs, but just generally for candidates as well. I think what's important, especially for PMs, beyond you know talking about outcomes and impact, I think it's also really important to contextualize that. I think some people get over the tactical piece and they're able to articulate their impact, but then they don't talk about what that means in the context of what the business is trying to achieve. And so without that context, like these outcomes that you're talking about actually just fall into the void, right? It's like
Mm.
who are your stakeholders? Like, why is this important to your business, right? Like if you are putting together, you drove an initiative for a product that increased profitability, but the context of the business was, to drive customer acquisition at all costs, then it's not actually that important, given the outcomes of the business. So I think really like being very clear about that at all stages of the interview process will make you stand out for sure.
And actually, when you look at your own funnel and when you look at your talent pool, when you're sourcing for PMs, where do you find people have the most struggle with, or where do they drop off the most?
Yeah. Um, I would say probably mid to later funnel when you get to the stages where you have a little bit more room to in the interview to talk about those contextual items, where you're going to get a lot more questions that are really going to be digging into the why and where you actually have more time and space to dig into that. Um, and this is really important. Like it's not that hard if you know what you're doing, and if you have like the tips and you understand sort of the back end to get your resume, to a recruiter, or to at least get a phone screen. um, I think the hard part is really, again, articulating that impact and articulating that within the context of the business. The other place where people will fall off is the phone screen. If it's not going to be sort of that like mid to late funnel, I think your first introduction, really the successful introduction relies on being able to succinctly communicate that impact and that context when you have 20 to 30 minutes with the recruiter. So that's probably like the other place where people fall off.
And that's actually really interesting because when we speak to RPMs, one of the biggest struggles is actually with the top of the funnel. So like at the phone call stage, even getting their interviews read, or sorry, the resumes read. I think especially for you, you've been talent sourcing for quite a while and have quite an experience. And you've done some creative things on LinkedIn. What are some of the tips that you would give to a PM that is both, not from the PM space and also existing PMs that would help them with LinkedIn SEO? So when someone like you is sourcing, makes it so much easier for you to reach out to them and understand what they do and if they're the right fit for the startup.
Yeah. So really the trick to that is understanding how like the tools that recruiters use actually operate in the background. So like LinkedIn Recruiter is a big one, applicant tracking systems. And I'll explain how those work, but I think an important preface to this is that you're not meant to get every interview. You're not meant to get every role that you interview for. You're not meant to pass every single interview that you do. There's a lot of value in failing those interviews when the alignment isn't right. You can try to sort of like make it work and wiggle your way into a role that maybe actually doesn't align with your strengths or your kind of where you want your career to go, or your goals. And at that point, you're just by falling out of the process because you're not aligned to the role, you're saving yourself future time and headache. So I just want to preface that is that like use these tools that I'm giving you to optimize your search for the right roles that you're actually interested in aligned to, and take a quality over quantity approach. And it's okay to fail. Like you're supposed to. We're looking for specific things, and it doesn't make you a bad candidate. It just means you're not the right person for this role particularly. So I just wanted to preface that. But basically, one of the biggest tools that recruiters rely on, especially headhunters, we spend a lot of time, looking for talent that maybe hasn't even applied to us. But even like applicant tracking systems, when you're an inbound, the most important piece is keywords. And so the difference between a public LinkedIn account and the LinkedIn account that recruiters and talent teams pay for is that, we don't just have access to first, second, and third degree connections within our network. We have access to every single user that is on LinkedIn. And the way that we can sort through them is through an advanced search function. Most of the tools within that advanced search function are basically just based off of keywords. You can get as granular as specific combinations of keywords like Boolean, or you can get as specific as like we can filter for veterans, we can filter for people with a very specific number of years of experience or a specific degree at a specific university. But I think the thing that we rely on most is those keywords. So what I'd recommend, if you're coming up in a search from a recruiter, it's because there's a keyword in your profile that matches what we're looking for. And we will go through several combinations of Boolean, which is, for those of you who don't know, just search logic. It's a string of keywords with and or operators. So you can scrape a bunch of different combinations of words in somebody's entire profile. So this would be everything from your headline to your summary, to the way that you describe your roles, to the skills that you outline. I think the most important piece is that summary of skills, and then the way that you're describing your experience. If you have a specific job in mind, read the job description, scroll down to the part where they tell you what they're looking for and what you'll be doing, and make sure that some of those keywords are popping up in how you describe your experience. That's how you're going to get scraped. If you don't have a specific role that you're looking for, but you know what type of role you want, and you've seen like several roles that are interesting to you, focus on those descriptions and see what those common denominators are and those common keywords, and make sure that they're in your profile, basically. So yeah.
Yeah, that's such a very valuable advice, because I feel like a lot of people have their LinkedIn geared towards the position they have right now rather than the position they want. And often they won't have key terms such as like product manager if they're coming from, say, a developing background or a software tech background, and they want to make that switch. And you would assume that it'd be better for you to put that in the summary, or put in like looking for a product manager job. Like, are there certain things that you've seen that has worked or caught your eye when it comes to those adding those keywords in a more natural way?
Yeah, I think one of the most important pieces, and this comes back to that outcomes piece, is the way to it's kind of like actions speak louder than words, and even though all you have on LinkedIn is words, you can talk about your actions. So take that opportunity on that real estate on your summary of skills, as well as on the part of your LinkedIn profile where you actually describe your roles. Number one, actually fill those out. It's incredible how many people just put their title and not what they're doing. Most of those people probably aren't looking for a new job, but if you are, make sure it's spelled out. And then, yeah, really focus on that impact and that context and the language that you're using to describe those items. Make sure that there's crossover between sort of the keywords that you're using for your current role and the roles that you're looking for. Because it's one thing to have somebody look at your profile, but then your recruiter is going to take like 10 to 15 seconds to decide if they're going to read the rest of your profile. So, it's not just about getting their eyes on your profile, but then you actually have to like talk about what you've done, and it's not enough to just get scraped. So yeah, I think that's pretty important.
Perfect. And for us at DBP, like a lot of our learners and listeners are actually very practical people, and they love examples. Could we actually do an example? Because I know that on OpenCare, you're actually searching for a growth product manager right now. So on your end, what were some of the keywords that you'd be looking for in that position? Because maybe our like listeners can also kind of see like what are the core keywords and the surrounding keywords that they should be adding to their profiles.
Yeah. So I think for us, the growth PM role specifically is kind of like a marketing product manager. Like it's a mix. It's a connective tissue between marketing and product, and so a lot of what we're looking for there is how the way our product is built. For some context, the core product, the marketplace, is basically like a giant digital funnel. And so we want to optimize for our patients, converting to actually booking appointments through the OpenCare platform from the point that they land on our webpage, which also happens to be a product. So we're looking for key terms around perhaps the tech stack that we would use. We are looking, so some of the tools that we use, for example, if there are technical skills, some of those languages that somebody who would do well in the role would be leveraging. So things, and then more like activities that the person would be doing day to day to optimize for the outcomes we're looking for. So things like funnel, conversion, A/B testing, different technical terms around like APIs. You might have softer words in there as well, like things like efficiency or improved or
Optimizations, like
impacted. Yeah, exactly. So for us, we tend to do, and I think a lot of recruiters do this, is you come up with sort of like a hypothesis at the beginning of your search as to the type of experience that a person should have to do really well in this role, or at least the core skills, and then put together some proxies for the experience that would allow somebody to gain those skills, and then you search for those proxies. So it comes down to like years of experience, the types of companies, size of company, growth stage, right? We might even like, you know, for this role, we need somebody who's scrappy. We need somebody who understands our environment. So we might look for keywords like Series A, Series B. And then so we come up with our keywords based off of those proxies, and we create buckets of candidates, different profile types that we think would do well. And we come up with specific combinations of keywords that represent each of those buckets. So we might look a little bit more for like a technical bucket and have more terms like agile and you know, different like APIs and different like platforms that people are using, tools. Yeah, so basically we create those buckets, and
Awesome.
and then yeah,
It seems like there's
multiple approaches.
You pull from like, it seems like the first stage is like pull keywords from the job description, which is very easy. Then the second stage is like looking at what are the day-to-day of the PMs, breaking out keywords such as like A/B testing, optimization, CRO, common terms there. And then look if there are technical requirements and talk about like those ones. And then from there, you also, I think what's interesting is like your startup stage. So Series A, Series B, Series C. And even to that, I think there's a cool, one thing that you mentioned that I really liked was the tools of the trade. I know there's some people that put, you know, Twilio, Amplitude, Periscope, which are things that people would search for in their actual summary. So it's kind of, it's like what things that they use, but at the same time, it's also queuing off the SEO. It's a little bit like, I guess, marketing SEO, if people are familiar with that, in terms of you're trying to just get as many of those hits as possible from the Google, from the LinkedIn algorithm.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
and now that you mentioned it, how does your hiring for PM differ from, say, you know, an enterprise company? Because at Series A, you said there is definitely more scrappiness to it. But when you look at it, are you looking for someone more technical, someone more business oriented? And we can talk about more of a generic PM at this point rather than just the growth PM.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that you know, when it comes to like earlier stage startups like OpenCare, we're doing a lot with not a lot of people, right? So we are typically looking for people who have sort of a broader scope of responsibility and a broader scope of skills. We need to get more out of one PM than we might be able to. Then if you were at a larger company, like an enterprise company, you've got a little bit more wiggle room and people have like a little bit more focus in their roles. And so you'll see a clearer delineation between like more like business focused PMs, more like technical PMs. So when you're looking at an early stage startup like OpenCare, for example, you can expect us to look for people who actually have those technical skills, for example, up front, so that you can stretch further. We're generally looking also for high levels of business acumen. You will not have a massive team of product folks. So you're going to have a wide variety of stakeholders and a lot of stakeholders, and you need to be able to interact with them all at different technical levels. So that business acumen is really important. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that startups make is they lack focus. There are a million things that you can be working on, and that focus is really important. And so I think, you know, in a product person, what we're looking for is your ability to really ruthlessly prioritize what you're working on based on the context of what the business is trying to do. Take those North Star objectives that the business is going for, whether that's like for OpenCare, for example, we're focusing on, you know, sustainability and profit and going into our Series B. You know, that's our next big milestone. We would want to get a product manager that would understand that North Star and create their own objectives and their own priorities for product decisions that gear towards that. So that ability to focus, I think, is really important. But at the same time, we need people, I think that scrappiness and sort of intrinsic motivation is really important as well. Sounds like really cliche, but self-starters are actually really important. For early stage companies, like building a company from the ground up is not easy, and the plan changes all the time, and it can be stressful. It's also like the best thing you could possibly do. It's like jet fuel for your career, but it's hard. And so we need people who are genuinely curious and genuinely motivated to drive actual impact, because that's what keeps you going through the tough stuff. And people who can be scrappy, and understand there's more than one way to solve a problem, and people who aren't afraid of getting creative.
Yeah, and I love that because a lot of Drift PMs actually talk about how a product manager is really like the main role is to reduce the amount of decision fatigue that happens within a team. So the faster the team can make decisions, the more priority they give certain sprints or certain types of features they build up. And it's interesting because a lot of people think that technical PMs are like you need to know coding, you need to understand APIs, and I think to a certain extent, but at the end of the day, they need to understand that so they can prioritize properly. So I actually really like that we're getting a behind the scenes view of what actually happens in the hiring team. And one thing I actually want to double down on is you said before there are two main places that product manager gets stuck on. It's going to be at the phone interview stage and also at the end. And I'm curious, can we actually walk through that from the top of funnel side? So in a phone interview, what are you actually looking from a PM, and who gets like the yes and who gets a no?
Yeah. This is what's tough about the phone screen stage is that so just like any funnel, very high volume at the top, and then people start to fall off, and we eventually have a hiring decision. So what we're looking for at the top is actually a lot more tactical, and we tend to focus on looking for basic checkboxes. Like it's going to be somewhere between like 4 and 5 basic core skills or proxies, and usually they're not as complex as people think they are. And if you don't make it through a phone screen, it's probably not something you should take personally. It's really just like you have experience in a certain growth stage of company that is not in line with what we need. Like it can be as simple as that, or you are lacking experience with a specific tool, or depends on the company that and the role. But so really at the top of the search, we're actually keeping it pretty simple. We need to sort of find more efficient ways to cut through the noise and really get down to the core group of folks that we're looking for. So I would say the folks that check those boxes that we need for those basic skills that you might not have control over just based on your experience so far, plus those who can succinctly communicate their impact and the context of that impact is really important. So practice your 5-minute, elevator pitch. You're going to get asked, tell me about your role or tell me about yourself. And the way that you're describing your role and the impact or the projects that you choose to highlight, make sure that there's going to be sort of a line of similarity between what you've done in the past and what this role requires. And all that information is there for you in the job description. So number one, read the job description. And I think the other thing is like you should be able to tell a story about your career, like beyond like the impact and the skills and all that. At least at Open Care, what's really important to us is like people who understand their why, people who understand, the reasons behind why they've made the choices that they have so far in their career, and even if they've made mistakes along the way, can like talk about that and be sort of self-aware.
Yeah, so when we're talking about like LinkedIn and over the general process, what are some tips and tricks that you have for people that are going through the process? Say that they only had, a day or two to kind of get everything in order. What are things that you should focus on?
I think the first thing that you should do is find a comfy spot, grab a cup of tea, and take a notebook and think about what you want to prioritize in your career. I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make is they want to jump right into writing their resume. They want to jump right into fixing up their LinkedIn, and they're not actually thinking about what they want in their next step and then the strategy. As I mentioned earlier, like you really want to focus on quality, not quantity. Not every role is going to be right for you, and you can save yourself a lot of time by optimizing for the roles that are actually well aligned. You cannot optimize for those roles until you take some time to really like think about what it is that you want. So, once you've sorted that out and you have a strategic approach for your search, then based off of what you're looking for, optimize the way that you describe your experience for those types of roles. And you can do your own research by, looking at those ideal roles, those companies, reading about them. What are they working on? What are the major projects? What are the major outcomes? How do they describe their roles? What skills do they typically look for? And draw on those parts of your experience to highlight. So in terms of like how you can do that on your resume, again, like make sure that you're taking it from tactical. Stop talking about what you do day to day in your role. Start talking about those North Star objectives that you're driving towards with those tactical items. And then also add the context, and don't be afraid to do this in your LinkedIn profile. You'll really stand out, and in your resume as well. Talk about, with a certain level of privacy of how much you can talk about the business, like what those overarching goals are and how you drove towards that. And make it personal too, right? Like take a moment in your summary to talk a little bit about like who you are outside of work or some of the additional projects that you're working on. Do not underestimate the volunteer experience or like personal projects sections. Like talk about those things that you do outside of work as well. There are a lot of things that we can tell about you that keywords won't necessarily lead us towards, but once we get to your profile, we can see that if you have an entrepreneurial spirit and if you are a self-starter, like that'll come through in those side projects that you're working on. So that's really positive as well. So don't be afraid to like bring a little bit of yourself to the way you describe your experience.
And lastly, trying to become a product manager is a very tough journey. I think a lot of friends have also been through that as well. Has there been any success stories that you've seen someone that's kind of gone through the process and ended up becoming a product manager and something that could inspire some of the listeners?
Yeah. So one of the people at OpenCare, she was actually a part of OpenCare before I had even started, and she, prior to joining OpenCare, she was an analyst. So she came from the data side, started I think as more of like a generalist, and then got into analytics for customer success and more on the operations side, and then within data analytics eventually got to a place where she could support a product team, and that brought her to OpenCare. And she actually started as a product analyst. So, sort of like an adjacent role to product, but one that leveraged her existing skills and strengths. OpenCare happens to be a very data-driven company. And so that, the decisions that we make about our product are super data-driven. And so it was a natural fit. And she started taking on, I think a wider scope of business problems that she was solving, and took an approach that was very heavily anchored in data, and eventually actually grew to a product manager at OpenCare, and was responsible for I think some very pivotal product decisions for us that had a major impact on the business. And now she's, she spent several years at OpenCare and now has moved on, and she's a senior PM still within the health tech space. And so I think a really great success story of somebody who was very much a self-starter and had the right, really strong business acumen. I think that's what sort of made the link for her, and had those transferable skills, and was really able to carve out an ideal career path for herself within product. And I think that's something about, product management, is that like, you need to, it doesn't matter if you're in a more technical role, it doesn't matter if you're, in more of like a business focused role. I think that ability to think holistically, that, on top of the technical skills, that ability to think about your customers and approach problems with empathy, and most importantly, distill down your priorities based on the context of your business. I think anybody with that set of skills, doesn't matter what title you're coming from, like that's what's going to get you into a product position.
Yeah, and I feel a lot of people
to get there.
Yeah, a lot of people neglect that product analyst role or these like data analyst roles, because a lot of product management is based on data. And I find these are great roles where if you're transitioning into it are great paths. And I think that's an amazing story of someone that's definitely gone through that and also excelled, where she's also a senior product manager now, and traversing different industries and seeing what is out there. Yeah, I really appreciate the story. And I think that kind of wraps it up for us here. Thanks again for all your time. Really appreciate it. Lots of interesting insights around LinkedIn about things happening in the funnel, what are product managers actually focusing on when it comes to hiring decisions, and why they ask the questions they ask. So yeah, thank you again so much for your time. And yeah, anything else that you want to call out or shout out, any interesting projects that you want to, where can people like follow you if they want to keep more up to date? Because I know you do some blogging and some articles on the talent side.
I do, yeah. So I'm Charlotte Harris on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me there. I've got some webinars highlighted on my profile if you have any more questions about your job search, how to write a resume, just general interviewing tips. I have a completely free webinar on there that you can check out. Yeah, I mean, check out OpenCare. We are hiring for a growth product manager. The role is still open. Mm-hmm. You can work remote. It's based here in Toronto, but you can do it from anywhere in the world. Check out OpenCare. We're always looking to hire super smart people, and super intrinsically motivated folks. So you can check out our careers page, take a look at our culture, and see if it speaks to you. And that's it. I mean, that's the plug. So
yeah, and now people have the playbook to getting hired at OpenCare. So hopefully they take your tips, hopefully they take your trips. And again, thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Have an awesome day now.
Quentin. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.